months, and I'll promise them it'll be a long time before I'll be this long away from home.
Frédéric Castel, the French paper Le Figaro, to Commander Desurov. Could you share your thoughts on the problem of the common language that will be used on the International Space Station? Do you think that, like in aviation, English will become the language of space flights?
Вопрос к командиру Дежурова от корреспондента «Фигаро». Как вы думаете, вы не могли бы поделиться своими соображениями по поводу создания единого языка на космической станции? Как вы считаете, не станет ли им английский, так же, как он стал единым языком в авиации?
Да, наверное, в технике какой-то присутствует свой язык, чисто такой технический язык общения. Он не подлежит никакому языку, ни английскому, ни русскому, ни китайскому и так далее. И он вырабатывается в процессе работы, в процессе эксплуатации техники. И когда профессионалы работают, они уже сами выходят на этот язык общения, и им легче даже общаться и работать. Это само по себе как-то образовывается, и получается такой стиль общения на своеобразном техническом языке.
This is Nancy Holland, KHOU-TV, and this is for Bonnie. What kind of initial information have you gathered on the health of the MIR crew, and have there been any surprises so far, anything you didn't expect?
Well, I think you can see for yourselves how good they all look. Most of the information that we're collecting in terms of the metabolic, physiological samples and so forth are really going to be analyzed once we get all the data down on the ground. And there's a large team of investigators involved in doing that. So it'll take a few months before we actually get the whole picture together, and then I'm sure all of that, as we collect more data, will be forthcoming.
Jim McKenna, Aviation Week, for Dr. Thagard. What is the number one problem or issue that you believe should be addressed before Shannon Lucid arrives at MIR next March, as well as with regards to long-duration U.S. spaceflight?
My impression is psychological aspects probably loom largest. There doesn't really seem to be big problems physiologically. I think we still have to find out what's happening with mineral loss from bone, for instance. And obviously radiation is an ongoing problem as long as you're in space. But I think anybody can do 3 months or 4 months as I'm doing, and 6 months, in my opinion, and longer is a different matter entirely. I think Shannon won't have any problem, but I think we need to address some things for the folks who plan to be up here 6 months and longer.
This is Paul Hoverston with USA Today for Norm Thagard, sort of following up on the same question. What about the systems on MIR, or the setup or configuration, should absolutely not be done with the International Space Station, if there is anything?
Well, from what I saw, it takes considerable effort from two folks to keep MIR station operating. I think you would want to minimize the amount of maintenance ongoing that were required for a new space station. I don't think I'd run conduits, both air and electrical, through hatches, which make it difficult, if not impossible, to close those hatches rapidly if you needed to. And lastly, I would certainly pay a lot of attention to storage, because if there were a problem that we had, it was finding places to store things.
Nick Sorokin for the Voice of America. This is for Владимир Дежуров. Николай Сорокин с «Голоса Америки» Владимиру Дежурову. К чему было труднее всего привыкнуть на борту «Мира»? Вы там впервые.
Наверное, к той обстановке, непривычной для Земли, которая существует на станции и на всех космических кораблях. Это чисто такая специфическая космическая обстановка, где каждая вещь лежит по-своему и не характерно для Земли. Казалось бы, человек пытается ее положить так, как бы он хотел ее положить на Земле, но ему это не удается. И вот так получается, необходимо все это укладывать и располагать так, чтобы Это было удобно для космоса, удобно для эксплуатации в космосе.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Hoot Gibson. Hoot, the mission to date has been remarkably smooth, but like with all enterprises, there's probably room for improvement. What types of lessons have you learned that can be applied to future shuttle MIR missions or the assembly of the space station?
Todd, like you say, it has gone pretty smoothly. There's an aspect of it, though, that you don't see, and that's how hard we're hustling here on board every day to accomplish all the things that we need to get done. On a long-duration flight or a space station flight, you're not going to be able to keep up the kind of pace that we've been keeping up, and a lot of it has been associated with the rather difficult area of transfers of material from the orbiter to the MIR and from the MIR back to the orbiter, both equipment, future test equipment, completed test samples, and all those sorts of things. Now, we expected that this was going to be a pretty big effort, and there was going to be a lot of uncertainty, and there was actually going to be a lot of unknown when we actually got up here and tried to do it, and that, in fact, is kind of what we've bumped into, and we've been working a little bit extra and a little bit harder to try and accommodate all of those things. But that's the one area, and I think for the future docking flights, the transfer plan, the locations, the stowage, all of it needs to be detailed down to a T for us to really be able to do it smoothly and efficiently, and I think that's one of the big lessons that we will have seen out of this flight. Let me finish by saying that was not unexpected. We pretty well knew that that was the kind of situation we were facing when we got up here, and I think we've adapted to it about as well as you could.
Irene Brown with UPI for Dr. Thagard. If you had to do it all again, what would you have done differently or brought with you that you didn't have to prepare for 4 months in space?
Well, if I could have brought my wife along, I probably would have done that. I think I would have paid a lot more attention to the food that was stored for us on board. I think that in general we thought there were areas, room for improvement there, but otherwise I felt pretty good with what I already had on board. I don't require a lot. I had 2 good companions, and that made up for a lot of the deficiencies.
This is David Chandler from the Boston Globe for Charles Precourt. I understand you're one of the more fluent people in Russian. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the issues have been in working with a multinational crew that speaks different languages, and what you've learned from this mission that you might pass along to people on future multinational missions?
Well, I appreciate the question. It's kind of a follow-up to the question that Vladimir was asked earlier, and as he said, the technical aspects of our language can be achieved easily, even in spite of language differences. We're able, on orbit here, to mix our 2 languages and understand each other really well. But in any case, regardless of what we pick for an international language of the space station, we're going to have to know each other's languages at least a little bit for many years to come. You say that I'm fluent. I would not call it fluent yet. I've got an awful long way to go before I would consider my Russian skills proficient and fluent. However, if you take a look 10 years down the road and you have a cadre of people, not just crew members, but also in the control centers who have been working with each other for all that time, and you can build that kind of continuity, eventually you'll have a situation where you'll have people of from all the different partners who can communicate fluently with each other in a given language. I had an experience on my first flight with the Germans on Spacelab D2, and almost every single person in the German control center spoke English fluently, and it was a wonderful thing that they were able to achieve that level of capability, but it did take them many, many years for their workers in the control center to get to that level. And I think what we're looking at in a long-term program here, you'll see that evolution, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be an awful lot of work by a lot of people to get there.
Miles O'Brien with CNN for Commander Gibson. You called the docking the piloting challenge of a career. how does the undocking scenario, particularly in light of the minuet with the Soyuz capsule, compare?
Miles, it's going to be a very interesting evolution. It's going to be a fascinating evolution, having three bodies flying separately in space when we do undock, and Anatoly and I are looking forward very eagerly to flying in formation, as it were, and actually conducting that particular evolution. From a piloting point of view, however, Miles, I'd have to say that I've got a whole lot bigger corridor to fly within, and the farther away we move from the Mir space station, which of course is what we're doing during the undocking, the bigger my corridor gets, the bigger the cone expands to be, so the more room I have to maneuver in. And that's in direct contrast, of course, to the docking, where the closer we got, the tighter the constraints were on where we could physically be located. So while undocking is going to be a lot of fun and a real experience for both Anatoly and us aboard Atlantis, it's going to be, I think, a little bit less constraining than the docking was.
Earl Lane, Newsday for Norm Thagard. When you said that psychologically a 6-month mission is a different matter entirely, what did you mean? Did you get on each other's nerves, or were you starting to get on each other's nerves?
No, it had nothing to do with the crew relationships. Those remained fine throughout. In fact, I can honestly say there were never any serious disputes among the crew. And probably wouldn't have been even on a 6-month mission. For the American on board a Russian space station, you're the only English speaker on board in general. The cultural isolation is extreme. There were times when I went 72 hours without speaking to an English-speaking person. I didn't get a lot of news up here. All of those things start to weigh heavily after a while. Since I knew from the start I could do anything for 3 months, it wasn't going to be a problem for me. If I'd been looking at 6 months, I would have been real worried at about 3 months that I wasn't going to make it.
Atlantis MIR, this is the end of the questions from JSC. Stand by for KSC PAO.
Atlantis MIR, this is KSC PAO. How do you hear me?
Loud and clear.
This is Beth Dickey with Reuters. I'd like to speak with the three commanders for a second about their impressions of the coordination between the ground control centers and the orbiter in Mir, especially with the science crew. And Norm seems to have gotten a bit testy at times in the last couple of days over things that you all are being asked to do, and there have been concerns that you've been overbooked. Could each of the commanders please talk a little bit about your impressions of that? Do you feel overbooked? Is this just a nit that's being picked, or is this a serious problem that will have to be worked out before the next joint mission is flown?
Well, Beth, with regard to Norm sounding testy, let me just say that Norm always sounds like that, and I don't believe that Norm has been testy or meant to sound testy during any of this. I have to give the ground tremendous grades on the coordination and the way they put everything together and the way that things have flowed up here. This is not an easy thing to coordinate the activities of MIR 18, MIR 19, and STS 71. And I think that both mission control centers, the SOUP and Houston, in my view and from what I've seen, have done just a spectacular job of ironing this all out and making this flow smoothly. So that's what I think about the whole thing. I would like to hear a Russian translation come up of the question for Anatoly and for Volodya at this point.
Мне хотелось бы задать вопрос к трем командирам и услышать ваши впечатления.
You've been watching live coverage of a news conference from space. You're able to see the team of 10 American and Russian space travelers talking to the world's press from the largest joint vessel created by last week's docking of the U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis and the Russian space station Mir. They were asked questions, and Commander Hoot Gibson, who performed the delicate docking maneuver on Thursday, said although they expected this to be a tough mission with lots of hard work, it was even more demanding than they'd expected. And one of his colleagues, when asked what he would have done differently, said he'd have given more consideration to what food they would have taken up with them. Well, CNN International plans live coverage of the undocking of Mir and Suez and Atlantis tomorrow. That's expected to happen on Tuesday at 1100 hours GMT. For most of our viewers now, coming up is World Sport, and there's more world news at the top of the hour.
Earth beckons 8 members of the largest space crew in history. 10 astronauts and cosmonauts are in their last full day together aboard Mir and Atlantis. Dr. Norman Thagard, the American who's endured more than 330 freeze-dried meals in 3.5 months there, says he now craves hot dogs, but had no dietary advice for Shannon Lucid, the next astronaut who's scheduled for an extended stay aboard Mir.
What is the number one problem or issue that you believe should be addressed before Shannon Lucid arrives at Mir next March, as well as with regards to long-duration U.S. spaceflight?
My impression is psychological aspects probably loom largest. There doesn't really seem to be big problems physiologically. I think we still have to find out what's happening with mineral loss from bone, for instance. And obviously radiation is an ongoing problem as long as you're in space. But I think anybody can do 3 months or 4 months as I'm doing, and 6 months, in my opinion, and longer is a different matter entirely. I think Shannon won't have any problem, but I think we need to address some things for the folks who plan to be up here 6 months and longer.
The de-docking will be carried live on CNN International at 1100 GMT Tuesday.
Now, US and Russian astronauts are spending their last full day together in orbit. They held a press conference from the docked Mir and Atlantis spacecrafts a short while ago. The astronauts said that the mission was great fun but hard work. 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 American astronaut, who have been conducting medical research, will return to Earth after nearly 4 months in orbit. That American, Norman Thagard, spoke about the medical implications of such long stints in space.
There doesn't really seem to be big problems physiologically. I think we still have to find out what's happening with mineral loss from bone, for instance. And obviously radiation is an ongoing problem as long as you're in space. But I think anybody can do 3 months or 4 months as I'm doing, and 6 months, in my opinion, and longer is a different matter entirely. I think Shannon won't have any problem, but I think we need to address some things for the folks who plan to be up here 6 months and longer.
Well, CNN International will bring you live coverage of the undocking of the Atlantis, Soyuz and Mir. That's scheduled for Tuesday at 1100 hours GMT. Astronauts are spending their last full day together in orbit. They held a press conference from the docked Mir and Atlantis spacecrafts a short while ago. 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 American astronaut, who have been conducting medical research, will return to Earth after nearly 4 months in orbit. While the current mission has gone well, a new Hollywood movie reminds viewers of the courage of 3 U.S. astronauts when their mission went horribly wrong. As CNN's Miles O'Brien reports, many of the heroes in that real-life space emergency were earthbound at mission control.
So this is our 3rd floor control room.
The 3rd floor control room at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. The real-life setting for the real-life drama of Apollo 13.
This is a bit of a holy place for us.
A holy place for NASA veteran Glenn Lunny. He was a 32-year-old flight director that April evening in 1970 when his moon-bound spacecraft blew up.
This is where the first readings would show up. There was so many of them that were out of limits and so many of them that were looking funny that they weren't sure that they should believe that.
But the numbers were, of course, true, and the team of technicians and engineers in mission control was put to the ultimate test.
If you wanted to construct a problem, a simulation problem or a real problem, that took us as close to the edge as we could, and yet still be solvable, still have a solution in there somewhere, then this Apollo 13 flight posed that to this team.
The team made all the right moves, and the beleaguered crew survived. Lunny is among those who call it NASA's finest hour.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
And now, 25 years later, Hollywood has offered a gripping few hours which recounts the drama. For many people today, Apollo 13, the movie, tells a story which had been previously overlooked. It's the story of the men who worked in these trenches, the unsung heroes of the Apollo program. The movie is a sort of right stuff for the slide rule set.
And Capcom for Hoot, he has a go for approach and docking. Initiate on time.
A set which has long toiled in the shadow of the astronaut corps.
Flight controllers know when they sign up for it that they're not in the glamour spot, that much of what they do is behind the scenes.
No, they don't mind getting a little credit for orchestrating orbiting minuets like this.
Houston, Atlantis, we have capture.
But flight controllers insist glory is not what they seek.
When we see two vehicles coming together and doing a docking, we think it's neat stuff. And if we never got any credit for it, I think we'd still be doing it.
Glenn Lunny loved it too, and watching the movie has reminded him of why.
It was a challenge then to how good were we? You know, how good are you at this, really?
Seeing problems as challenges, not obstacles. That's what got Apollo 13 home safe and sound. And that's what keeps this team in the trenches, with or without credit from Hollywood. Miles O'Brien, CNN, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Time out to talk to reporters on Earth during a joint press conference. CNN's John Holloman has been following the mission for us here on Earth. John, what's been happening?
Very interesting news conference to me. You know, the headlines from the astronaut-cosmonaut news conference from space involve why they're doing what they're doing, spending all this money, and how it is to live basically by yourself in a new environment for a long, long time. The 10-person crew of Atlantis MIR has allowed ground controllers to look around their spaceship today. Look at these pictures. From the outside, the docking adapter was most interesting to people on the ground. You see it over on the right of your screen, right under our CNNI globe. NASA's Mission Control and the Russian Space Agency's Kaliningrad headquarters controllers were fascinated with that picture. Shuttle Commander Hoot Gibson says the fact that everything has worked so well means the space station construction project that's scheduled to begin in about 2 years will be possible.
Well, I've been real impressed with the fact that the things that we did on this mission are exactly the sorts of things that we need to do with Space Station, and I guess in the opinion of the crew here, things have flowed pretty smoothly. Certainly the rendezvous and docking, all of the mechanisms, all of the machinery that had to operate, operated in spectacular function, and I think we've done a pretty good dry run for the sorts of things that we would need to do with an international space station, and so I think I speak for all of us when I say we feel pretty good about the way this mission has gone and what it portends for future space station.
Norm Thagard, who turned 52 today, got a plastic blow-up birthday cake, and he celebrated his birthday by telling his family he's sorry he's been gone so long, and he's got big plans for them when he gets back to Earth.
I owe them a large debt. I, after all, at the end, get to fly in space, and they don't, but they make the same sacrifice of separation that I do. First of all, we plan to take a vacation the first moment that that's possible. It was not the first time we've done this. I spent a year in Vietnam, so this is just another 4 months, and I'll promise them it'll be a long time before I'll be this long away from home.
The most interesting part of the news conference, at least to me, was what Thagard talked about in the psychological problems he had being in orbit for 4 long months.
My impression is psychological aspects probably loom largest. There doesn't really seem to be big problems physiologically. I think we still have to find out what's happening with mineral loss from bone, for instance, and obviously radiation is an ongoing problem as long as you're in space. But I think anybody can do 3 months or 4 months as I'm doing, and 6 months, in my opinion, and longer is a different matter entirely. I think Shannon won't have any problem, but I think we need to address some things for the folks who plan to be up here 6 months and longer.
Let's talk about what's coming up next. The shuttle crew will finish unloading supplies for the MIR cosmonauts. Cosmonauts will assist in bringing last-minute medical supplies. Tomorrow morning, about 7 o'clock Eastern Time, this is what will be happening in space. The 2 cosmonauts who are aboard the space station will get into their Soyuz capsule. It'll undock from the station, go out in space while some pictures are made. Those are the 2 crew people who will be operating it. And then while that happens, the shuttle, which is down at the far end of the MIR, will move away, pull back, do a 180-degree turn, and begin to fly in a big circle around the whole thing. Meanwhile, the Soyuz capsule will come back in and dock again. It's so complicated, the folks at NASA had to use a supercomputer, one of the big computers, to make that animation because there's so many things going on in space. And we'll get to watch it together here tomorrow morning.
Great. John, just over the weekend, I went to see the film Apollo 13 that's just opened here in the States.
Yeah.
And you come away from that film with the feeling that no matter how much you prepare for something, something can always go wrong. Now, there was a big build-up for the docking of Mir with Atlantis with Mir. This undocking tomorrow, it's also very potentially dangerous.
It could potentially be dangerous, but Hoot Gibson was asked this question: how does the undocking? Miles O'Brien, in fact, our science guy, asked him, how complicated is the undocking compared to the docking? And he says if they can get the two things disconnected, the undocking will be a piece of cake, because as soon as you pull out so that you don't risk damaging the shuttle or the space station, then you've got a wide area that you can play around with. He figures after the latches give way, if they do as they are supposed to, it'll be fine. And so we'll be watching together and just see. It's going to be spectacular picture-wise, because there'll be three different vantage points: the shuttle, the Mir, and this little Soyuz thing that's zapping around in its own little world out there. So be a beautiful picture story to share.
Okay, look forward to it. John Holloman, thanks very much. And for our pictures from space, we now look at what we hopefully hope to see are some of the Atlantis astronauts saying their goodbyes to the Russian cosmonauts. We hope to bring that to you. We didn't quite have it, but not to worry, we'll move on.
Together for the last time, the world's biggest space crew is getting ready to split. From Washington, Earth awaits as 8 cosmonauts and astronauts prepare to head back home. This is of the joint U.S.-Russian space venture. CNN's John Holloman has been monitoring the mission, covering it, and he has our story.
You come back and we get to see you again.
The astronauts and cosmonauts have done all the work they have to do together and have officially said goodbye. But now they're preparing for what may be the most exciting part of this mission visually, the undocking of the shuttle Atlantis from Space Station Mir. Shuttle Commander Hoot Gibson says what he and his crew have done this week is prove that the world can build a modern space station more than 200 miles up.
The things that we did on this mission are exactly the sorts of things that we need to do with Space Station, and I guess in the opinion of the crew here, things have flowed pretty smoothly. Certainly the rendezvous and docking, all of the mechanisms, all of the machinery that had to operate, operated in spectacular function, and I think we've done a pretty good dry run for the sorts of things that we would need to do with an international space station and so on.
The star of this mission has been Norm Thagard. He's the first American to spend more than 3 months in space. He's now increasing his record to more than 110 days. He says for him, the biggest problems were psychological.
For the American on board a Russian space station, you're the only English speaker on board in general. The cultural isolation is extreme. There were times when I went 72 hours without speaking to an English-speaking person. I didn't get a lot of news up here. All of those things start to weigh heavily after a while. Since I knew from the start I could do anything for 3 months, it wasn't going to be a problem for me. If I'd been looking at 6 months, I would have been real worried at about 3 months that I wasn't going to make it.
What would Thagard bring along for a future stay aboard Mir?
Well, if I could have brought my wife along, I probably would have done that. I think I would have paid a lot more attention to the food that was stored for us on board. I think that in general we thought there were areas, room for improvement there. But otherwise, I felt pretty good with what I already had on board. I don't require a lot. I had 2 good companions, and that made up for a lot of the deficiencies.
The undocking promises to be spectacular. The Soyuz capsule attached to Mir will pull away with the new Mir crew aboard. The 2 cosmonauts will make movies of the shuttle as it undocks. Then Soyuz will reattach to the much larger Russian space station, while Atlantis moves away for its return to Earth. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
The Atlantis and Mir spacecrafts, that's scheduled for 1100 hours GMT Tuesday.